Welcome back, Wealth Builders. Excited to be here with you to talk about maximizing your productivity. And again, I would remind you that one of the really cool things about this is this can apply to your team. And what basically ends up happening is if you are in a position that you can make your team more effective, then all of a sudden that has a magnifying compounding effect, right? So today we're going to continue our conversation about doing those things right. And we're carrying on from energy to the subject of what I'm going to call focus, okay? Now, focus should be four things. We'll see if I can remember what they are off the top of my head. Otherwise, I'm going to have to check some notes, but I should be on top of it. I normally don't have notes, but it's once in a while I've gone and processed and thought through and gathered this research together, and it's relevant. So I don't normally have give any sort of instruction on this subject, so I had to kind of pull it all together for you guys to give you what is hopefully the most complete education that you can and part of our ultimate productivity guide. Okay? So just think about this logically. We talked before about how if you don't have energy, it does not matter that you're working on something, you are going to be less productive. If you do not have focus, will you be productive or more or less productive? You'll be less productive, of course. Okay? If you want to maximize your productivity, you have to have focus. And focus kind of goes into momentum, etc. So let's get started. The first thing that we're going to talk about here is, how do I want to do this? Oh yeah, sure, whatever. Distractions. Okay? You don't want them. They are not useful for you, okay? Not good, not good. And you can kind of think of this from a bit of a formulaic standpoint that, well, so basically here's what the research shows. What the research shows is that you have a period of time that takes you to get into something. And if you get out of it, you have to redo that time, okay? So there's this in, out experience, and that drastically undermines your performance, okay? So if you want to be as productive as possible, you want to reduce distractions. How do we reduce distractions? In my experience, the number one piece on being able to improve focus, and clarity I guess could fit in there as well, right? The number one piece around being able to improve our focus is eliminating distractions from the environment. I'll give you some specific examples. I used to have our corporate email, this was through one of my companies previously, on Yahoo, okay? They're great, I actually quite like their service. But to do that, I would go to the Yahoo website and then click on the login, and then you would log in. Well, what would happen? I would get to the site and there'd be all these compelling news headlines. And so I'd start clicking on those, and now I'd end up wasting 30 minutes, okay? Distraction. What I ended up doing was I ended up setting my bookmark so it would go straight to the login page rather than to that page with all these news headlines. So I eliminate that distraction. Because was it that I was compelled to go and do that, to check those things out? No. But it was when they were right in front of me, I'm like, oh, what's that? So I want to eliminate it. Another thing. So I did card magic, sleight of hand, things like this for a number of years. And so I quite liked just playing around with the deck of cards. I wrote a bunch of books on it. And so for a long time, I would have a deck of cards sitting on my desk, and it would be enormously distracting. I would sit there and I'd play with it. I'd do shuffles. I would do all different, sleights, etc. And that's a distraction. What solves that problem? I just took the deck of cards, threw them in a drawer. Out of sight, out of mind. That one thing massively improves the productivity. Okay? So, Warren Buffett gives this suggestion. He says, it's like the 5-25 rule or something. He says, write down a list of the top 25 most important things that you do. We'll talk about this later, actually. And he says, okay, now circle the top 5 most important. So those top 5 are the must-do list. What happens to the other 20? You're like, oh, do them afterwards. He says, no, those are the absolute do not do list. Because the thing is that a lot of these other things are going to pull you away and they undermine your performance. We'll talk about that in prioritization. Distractions. We've got 2 pieces to distraction, okay? Or 2 pieces of how this plays out. The number one is, of course, how our focus and our productivity works, okay? The second, though, is how much time do we put into that thing, okay? So it wasn't, in the case of the cards or reading the articles, that wasn't just breaking my focus. It was also reducing the amount of time that I put into the thing or had available to put into the thing that was more valuable, okay? So my experience, number one thing you can do, adjust your environment. When you adjust your environment to remove distractions, as an example, shut off your phone, okay? This might not make sense for you, it might not be possible, etc., but very often it is. You can turn off your phone, turn off notifications from email, turn off social media notifications. This is very helpful, okay? Make it so that web pages that distract you don't come up. And the reason I mentioned the Warren Buffett story is if you go through and you analyze what are all the things that tend to undermine my productivity, create a list. It's like, hey, checking Facebook 3 times a day, checking my email 27 times a day, checking my text messages X amount of times, etc. Get rid of that stuff, okay? Remove it from your environment so it's not a distraction. You can go and do it later, all right, like a batch. But usually there's no real output advantage, okay? Having other people walking around in the same environment. Some people find Starbucks to be productive for them to sit down where I can't work in Starbucks. Like, I'm just not nearly as productive, okay? So this is a lot about environment. And one of the interesting things on environment is we've also got ergonomics, okay? Do ergonomics affect your productivity, especially long term? Yeah, absolutely. If you have like carpal tunnel syndrome, your wrists are bad or something, is that going to hurt your productivity? Yeah, it's going to destroy it. You know, if your back is bothering you, your neck is bothering you, are those things going to hurt your productivity? 100%. Destroy it, not good, okay? So pay attention to environment and ergonomics. Those things are going to be distracting. And then, ergonomics is an example of where it might be distracting, not in a way that takes away from your time, but it breaks your focus, right? You're like, oh, man. Now I have to get back into the thing that I was doing. I've lost that momentum. Momentum has a lot, productivity is a lot about momentum, okay? So pay attention to this here. Another thing here, focus, this comes down to the clarity piece, right? So I'm going to write clarity here. Is frequently having a list of what to do. How come? And usually a very short list, or a list that you can follow in order. We'll talk about it in the planning section, but the key is, if I'm wondering, what should I be doing? That's killing my productivity. That's hurting my focus, okay? Let's talk about multitasking. If you've done anything on productivity in the past, you've probably heard that everyone in productivity says, multitasking doesn't work, multitasking undermines productivity, etc. Is this true? Yes and no. And this is going to be the reality that, okay, if we sit down and we compare two people, one whom is multitasking, one whom is not, will minute per minute, will the performance be higher of the person who's not multitasking? Yes. If you put in an hour of focused time versus, you multitask, for the amount of time you put in, like versus split up, you will get more results. However, this is where all the stuff with multitasking breaks down, and you probably should do a lot of multitasking, which is probably what you do, but you should be conscious of it so that it works with focus. There is a time and place to do multitasking, and that is where you have to do something, and now there's a wait time. If you just sit here and say I'm cooking food, right? I put water on to boil. I could sit there and do nothing while the water boils. Will I be more likely to, catch it right when it boils and be on top of it? Yes, I will. If I go and do something else and the water is boiling and I'm distracted, will my productivity on this thing here be lower than if I just did this thing? Yes, it will, 100%. But the reality is the time wasted by standing there waiting is more than makes up for that decrease in productivity. Okay? So this is where, learning to work from anywhere, right? Waiting in a doctor's office and you pull out your phone and you do a quick email. Is your productivity on that email probably lower than if you were to sit down at your desk and just process through emails? Yeah. But you're not doing anything, so you're more productive than if you sat there just waiting in the doctor's office for them to call you, right? This is an example of productivity. So you're switching between tasks. I'm doing this right now with respect to these videos, okay? So between recording these videos, uploading these videos, editing these videos, doing stuff on the web page, like planning these videos, there's alternation between these tasks. How come? Well, we start one task and it goes through and there's a time, like say uploading or something, right? And all of a sudden it's like, all right, let's do that. So as an example, at first I hired somebody to go and do the editing for me, but what I found was it was costing so much for them to go and do it, and they're sitting there, it's just, you set it up, it takes very quickly, start the editing process, and it just renders, and now you're sitting there waiting for 10 minutes. Well, for the 2 minutes it takes to set up and then the 10 minutes to wait, I'll just do the 2 minutes myself and turn around and then be going and doing another task, and I can just alternate back and forth. And so the net productivity is overall higher, okay? So that's one of the key things with respect to multitasking. All right, so we talked about distractions. Distractions are a huge one, right? If you just greatly reduce your distractions, plan meetings, don't accept phone calls, don't accept got-a-minute meetings, this kind of thing, your productivity will go up a lot, okay? That being said, what is next? Well, one of the pieces to consider here is kind of following from energy is, well, actually let's talk about breaks, okay? So, how long can you maintain peak focus for? I don't know the answer to that. There's something called Pomodoro time, where I believe they do 20-minute segments, right? So you do 20 minutes, then you take like a 5-minute break, 20 minutes, 5 minutes break. So some people get really into this kind of thing. Some people get into like Uber Sleep, the founder of WordPress did it, right? Where you have like this crazy sleep schedule where you're doing these micro sleeps divided throughout the day. So you can go extreme with that. I think it's totally impractical for most people, so we're not going to worry about it. But the whole point is attention does have, like, we become mentally exhausted, okay? So our attention is going to drop off. If our attention drops off, what's that going to do to our ability to be productive? It's going to go down. So taking periodic breaks is definitely useful, okay? On the other hand, if we take too many breaks or our breaks are too long, then that's going to undermine our performance, right? This comes down to activity partially, okay? So there are times when, as an example, going for a walk, as we talked about in the previous video, very, very helpful. This relates in part to what is the type of task you're trying to do. Some tasks, going for a walk will not really help you. If you're supposed to be digging ditches, going on a walk will not help you much. For me, when I need to be creative, going on a walk helps dramatically. I just let my mind wander, right? I solve all sorts of problem solving, all sorts of coming up with new ideas, etc. That's very helpful. So planning breaks and don't necessarily have to plan it, right? But be conscious of it. Make sure you do take some breaks. When your attention, your focus start to wane, take a break. Make sure you bring in the right type of activity that's going to promote your productivity, right? So, there's times where maybe going on a walk is a really good idea. Maybe sometimes engaging with somebody else is a very good idea, right? These might help you with your focus. Okay, the next one is around the subject of pressure and rewards. Okay, research on this subject, very useful. So there's an idea that, hey, look, it's better to apply pressure. It's better to have time constraints. It's better to, well, let's pressure and then we'll talk about rewards in a minute. So, if I give you a deadline, will you be more or less productive? You might say, oh, I'm more productive. And that's true for a lot of types of tasks. It's not true for creative tasks. Applying pressure narrows your focus, okay? So, narrowing your focus is useful for getting done things that you know how to do. Getting done, if I need to type out a letter or something, it's going to be more effective. Doing email, it's more effective. Doing, these sorts of things. But if I need to do like creative problem solving and I need to come up with new ideas, pressure is less effective. Okay? I shouldn't apply pressure in that case. I should kind of like let my mind wander. The same is true for rewards, interestingly. So I've done studies. I can't remember, there's a great TED Talk on this. It is Dan Pink, I believe, is the name of the guy. And I forget the name of the book. But anyway, he talks about kind of like how there's a disconnect between what science knows and what business does. Okay? And so what do we know from science? We know that if you incentivize somebody, it has the same effect as this pressure. So if I say, hey, look, the faster you get this done, the more I'll pay you, that's great for pounding nails. That's great for things like this. But if you have a creative problem-solving task, that actually hurts your performance. So if we want creative problem-solving, what we want to do is we want to remove the pressure. We want to make sure the person is not distracted by, hey, I have insufficient money, I'm stressed about bills at home, all these things that are going to distract you, okay? And then let them go to work. Or same thing for ourselves, okay? That pressure and performance-based compensation. Performance-based compensation is great if you want people to make a certain number of calls, do a certain number of appointments, meetings, etc. That's useful. If you want somebody who's a researcher to do it, you shouldn't. You will actually hurt their performance. You could say, hey, I'll pay you $1 million if you can solve this problem for me in the next 6 months. You know what? You would have been better off to just compensate them well. It makes no difference how well they do or their time frame, and you just set them loose on that problem. They will solve it faster and better. That is what the research shows. Very interesting, right? Very, very interesting. So that should give you like a little bit of an idea around the subject of focus. These are all things to kind of help with boosting your focus, boosting your productivity overall. If you apply these things, you're going to do, you're definitely going to get some decent gains out of this. So take it and go and use it. And we're going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video as we can continue the ultimate productivity guide. Environment was the big lesson from here, right? Environment ergonomics, that's probably the number one. You can change this stuff here, you can play around with, especially for your team, but for yourself as well. Because, okay, if you're doing, calls, etc., like these things, should you apply pressure and rewards for yourself? Yes, absolutely. Okay, so know where to apply it, where not to apply it. That's the lesson. And clarity, avoiding some of the distraction, etc., is knowing in advance, having like something that you just go to, and you don't have to think about it. Not having to think about it, having that clarity is going to improve your focus, improve your momentum, etc. So maybe you have an app that tells you, okay, this is the thing to do. Maybe you have an assistant who organizes it for you, says, hey, here's your top 3 things, etc. Great. One last thing, actually, from Getting Things Done, David Allen, is getting things out of your head. Okay? So a lot of times the distraction is that we don't have clarity or cleanliness. So this is kind of like people who talk about inbox zero. Whether you need inbox zero or not is a debate, right? Generally, I would say inbox zero philosophy is not fantastic for productivity, even though, but the gap there is that if you don't have a system for organizing the things that need to be done, for letting things not slip through the cracks, and you're trying to keep them in your head, that's going to undermine your performance. It's going to be mentally distracting for you, okay? So this is where having a calendar, right? Things go into a calendar, and some sort of a to-do list. Okay? If you can get everything out, and you can put it on these 2 places, then at least it's out, okay? And then you can go through, and from a planning standpoint, you can put those into a list that's prioritized, and you can apply them accordingly. These things will, they're little things that will help you, and you'll definitely get a little better. If you're mentally like, oh, did I forget about this? Did I, don't make sure you like to-do notes. This could also be like, I record ideas that are coming up for me, right? So it's like, oh yeah, I have an aha. So I have a file of notes. I used to use Evernote. I love Evernote. I don't like that they started charging for it, so I use OneNote now, and also good. It's on my phone, it syncs to my computer, it's on the internet, it's great. So just to record notes. Hope that helps you, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.